Hello and welcome to the Business of Betting podcast. Today I'm joined by Tom Kysar from Augur. Tom, thanks very much for coming on. Before we get into this episode, make sure you follow us on Twitter @bettingpod and check out the website businessofbetting.com. Guest suggestions are much appreciated. This podcast is proudly sponsored by Betfair Proprietary Limited. Betfair operates a betting exchange and is licensed in the Northern Territory of Australia. Residents of Australia can join Betfair by visiting betfair.com.au and support this podcast by using promo code BOBPOD. Please gamble responsibly. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy this episode of the Business of Betting podcast. Today I'm joined by Tom Kysar from Augur. Tom, thanks very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Tom, why don't you start a little bit about your background and how you got involved with Augur?
I've been working with cryptocurrency and Bitcoin for a couple of years now, about 6. I worked with 2 early token and Bitcoin startups out in the San Francisco Bay Area. Augur happened to be a very early cryptocurrency Ethereum project, and being in the space around that time, they were a bigger name. It was a bigger project. It was one of the kind of first use cases of Ethereum I think people saw when the first paper and some of the ideas were initially published. And long story short, I ended up working with both Joey and Jack on a project for Augur, unrelated. And a year later, I had the opportunity to join them and work with the Forecast Foundation, which is the development entity of Augur. That's the actual corporate company that did the crowd sale, and we're the ones that have the engineers that maintain the core Augur development code base and whatnot. And I've been there for about 3 years now doing operations. I'm the director of operations. Augur launched about a year ago. We've seen it live out in the wild for just about over a year now. It's been a very fun and wild ride, and we have some fun things and coming down the line pretty soon.
So most people know about decentralization or blockchain, potentially Bitcoin, probably Ethereum even. But tell us about Augur in a little bit more detail. And if you read the white paper, it says that it's a trustless, decentralized oracle and platform for prediction markets, which sounds incredibly interesting. And I'm sure the listeners are very interested in what on earth is Augur.
Absolutely. Augur is a protocol to make decentralized prediction markets. What is a prediction market? Prediction market is a market where people can bet on the outcome of any event, as long as it has a definitive outcome. So Augur is software that runs on the Ethereum blockchain, which is a decentralized protocol. It runs on a network of nodes that exist all around the world, and anybody can run these nodes voluntarily. So Augur is a set of smart contracts that was deployed to the Ethereum blockchain about a year ago. Now, Augur allows traders and market creators to create markets, again, on literally any market or any outcome you would like. So, from politics to sports betting to financial markets, as long as it has a definitive outcome, you can go onto Augur, and with a little bit of Ethereum, you can create a market in 5 or 6 clicks, and it is a global decentralized prediction market that anybody can participate in. No middleman. All the money's dealt with programmatically in these smart contracts. The money gets escrowed, market gets resolved, all the payouts gets automatically distributed to all the different participants. It's essentially taking the idea of a bookie or a bookmaker and removing them from the equation. Truly peer-to-peer betting in a way where there isn't somebody intermediating that bet, either taking the fee, the vig, or whatnot, setting the line. This is 1-to-1. You're pretty much only paying what the transaction cost is to bet on Ethereum.
So why do you think it was created when it was created? I know I've heard actually Joey talk a little bit about some of the things in the beginning, but from your perspective, what were the benefits or the value to the consumers who are going to access and use the Augur protocol?
Long run, Augur is able to offer markets that other books and other exchanges potentially don't offer. There's no limits on the markets that can be created. There's no user accounts. There's no limits on deposits. There's just no max bet limits. All of these kind of rules and restrictions and limitations traditionally imposed on a bettor or a gambler are removed in this situation for the most part. Obviously, there's pros and cons and trade-offs of centralization versus decentralization. However, in the long run, it can be a significantly cheaper alternative, and it's already kind of proving that. Augur generally online right now on liquid and popular markets that other books are trading generally gives the best odds, along with a significantly deeper book at what the best bet is. And that's somewhat inherently from the fact that Augur doesn't have a 10% withdrawal fee. Augur doesn't have, it's not a bookie, so it's not somebody, inherently setting, the line against you on the other side. It's an exchange model, but it's a peer-to-peer exchange model.
I want to ask about decentralization, and obviously people know Betfair, they know Smarkets, they know some of the typical peer-to-peer betting exchanges that are centralized. Tell us the benefits of decentralization and what makes it different, better, unique, or even some of the disadvantages that you come across when you're relying on this decentralization aspect.
So, decentralized versus centralized prediction market. Decentralized, long run, it's going to be cheaper inherently just because it's a peer-to-peer exchange model versus, versus a bookie model. You don't have to trust your counterpart. You don't have to trust a bookie here. You're not depositing money to some strange offshore, betting exchange, hoping that they're going to let you withdraw. This is, escrowed, trustless markets. So there is no chance that you are not going to get paid out if you win that bet. So the trust element of trading with a different bookie or a different counterparty is entirely removed within that. As well as the fact that this is a decentralized, censorship-resistant prediction market protocol, meaning there are not, rules and limitations and restrictions imposed on either the market creators and both the traders. So from a creator's perspective, now anybody can be a market creator. You can use Augur, you can create a market on any outcome that has a definitive event. You can charge a market creator fee, and you can make that market will now exist because of you, and anybody can participate in that market in the world, just kind of like Bitcoin.
Take us back to a few days before launch, day one of launch, the first, say, 30 days. How was that process? What was going through you and the team's mind, and how did you feel when things were coming to life for you guys? Things were in good shape leading up to launch, thankfully. While we were, obviously there were some last minute things that always come up, and some last minute problems that always arise. In the long run, we felt pretty good going into it. The couple days before, we had to do a token migration with migrating the new rep from the old rep contract to the new rep contract that would exist within this new Genesis universe that we launched. But we spent a couple days doing a lot of communication with exchanges, getting them on board, telling them what's going on, giving them instructions on how to, complete the migration process with us and with all the other rep token users. And it was somewhat terrifying. It was actually highly terrifying, but we're in the long run it ended up working. But we're deploying a set of it was initially a set of 26 contracts that then expands to a set of about 100 roughly. So it's a very large moving puzzle that we had deployed to the Ethereum blockchain, and we hadn't tested it on mainnet due to the kind of positioning of the Forecast Foundation and us as the development entity. We don't do any interactions on the Augur protocol. So we had tested it on the testnet. However, we had never tested it on the mainnet before. So deployment day on July 9th last year was the first
first time those contracts really had ever been deployed to the main network before. There were some problems that came with that. Obviously, in the first 12 hours was kind of chaos, but it worked. And it's proven to work over the past 12 months, at least at a high level. The game theory behind it and the incentive structure and the incentive system hasn't been broken. It's we can't prove that it works yet because we haven't seen the full thing play out. However, it's proven that it's working as of now, which has given us a lot of confidence, at least going into V2. When we went back to the V1 contracts and did upgrades for V2, the changes that were made, they were done with good decision making behind it. We try not to make a whole lot of changes. The more changes that you make, the higher chance of now something new or additional going wrong is. But at the same level, we needed new features, new improvements, new updates and upgrades to the protocol. But it was the whole launch week and day and event was a somewhat slightly terrifying experience the whole time. But then once it was done and it was out there and it was working, it felt like, the weight of the world was finally off all of our shoulders until we went to bed and woke up and realized, oh my God, this is actually only the beginning. And that's kind of where we're at today now.
So I'm a user, I go on Augur. What markets can I create? Is it limited to yes, no, win-loss type stuff, or is it broader than that?
Yeah, so you're going to have three different types of markets that you're able to create. A yes-no market, a categorical market with up to 8 outcomes, and then a scalar market where a market can land on a number set between a certain range that you can define as well.
Okay, so I can literally bet on the weather, for example. I can bet on a horse race or the number of home runs someone's going to hit, and I can bet on who's going to win the Super Bowl.
You can bet on all 4 of those things. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, interesting. And then in terms of trading time, is there any set limits or any set parameters with that? Or I can literally create it, a day before a horse race, a day before a sporting event, or a month out from the day of the weather, for example, and things like that? Or is there time constraints within that?
There's no time constraints within you creating a market. There is a catch to that in this particular instance right now because we have V2 coming in that we do have a cutoff date in which markets shouldn't resolve afterwards. At this point in time, however, that's not a long-term or inherent feature of Augur. So no, there's no time limits. You can create a market whenever you want, as long as it is before that outcome is defined. The only time limit right now is settlements of the markets due to the distributed reporting. So assuming nobody disputes what the initial reporter stakes as the outcome of that market, the resolution time is 7 days. And in V2, that's going to be escalated to 3 days for a minimum time.
So you touched on a little bit then. Tell me a little bit about how the reporting works, because if it's fully decentralized and you're not involved in the protocol in a direct sense or a centralized sense, how do you know the Yankees beat the Mets, for example?
So each market has a designated reporter that the market creator sets. So when someone's creating a market, they give a Ethereum address the privilege to provide an initial report to that market. Now, assuming that initial reporter submits a report, that report will then go into a 1-week dispute window. Every initial report is then given the chance to be disputed by the crowd. Essentially, if you are the centralized initial designated reporter, you are incentivized to report the right answer, because if you report the wrong answer, or what consensus or somebody out there believes is the wrong answer, and they stake rep against you, you're going to lose your initial reporting bond as well. So you're financially incentivized to tell the truth. So the idea is, majority of markets actually resolve with a centralized designated reporter, which is a single person coming in and saying if the Yankees beat the Red Sox. Now, that outcome goes to the crowd. And if nobody disputes it within 7 days, that outcome is deemed finalized. Essentially, we're giving anybody who holds rep you get a 50% ROI if you successfully dispute a outcome. So there's a potential 50% ROI that exists, out there to dispute and correct potentially invalid or incorrect outcomes on these markets. So it's not every market goes through distributed reporting. That would be a very long and lengthy and workful process on behalf of the rep holders. The idea is that you don't need every outcome or every market to actually go through this distributed reporting process. You just need it to exist in the event of when it needs to be used. So it's like the threat of distributed reporting keeps majority of these designated reporters honest. And if they're not, people do come in very quickly, rep holders, and dispute these outcomes. And there's little sub-communities of rep holders that have made websites and forums where they, communicate and, give their case for why they believe one market should be one way or invalid or another. But it's a whole community of people who own this token. And every week, they have a chance to come into Augur and see if, in fact, the Oracle is staying honest and it's actually reflecting reality. And if it's not, there's quite a large financial incentive for them to go in there and fix that.
Incentives and some wisdom of the crowds working together. It sounds good. So I want to get into liquidity. And the first stop on the liquidity train is Ethereum is pretty volatile compared to other sort of the US dollar, for example, and I've seen certainly at times the daily volatility can be 3, 4, 5, 6% even. What type of challenge does that present to you and the team?
It's been a constant challenge for, I think, all of Augur markets, because right now Ether is the settlement currency of all Augur markets. So it's a pretty frustrating situation to be in where you can be a bettor and, hey, I won my bet, but I'm actually negative in value because my settlement currency has depreciated or gone down. So Ethereum, yes, very volatile. And Augur launched in pretty much an Ethereum down run. Only until recently, since then, since Augur's lifespan, Ethereum's pretty much, the price is just pretty, on a slow kind of slump downwards. So all escrowed bets and locked bets are essentially just plummeting in value as Ether plummets in value as well. There's obviously the counter of, if Ether goes up, then everyone's bets become much larger as well. But at the end of the day, we don't believe that's a ideal experience for a bettor or a gambler. It should be in some sort of a stable currency. Augur will be using DAI, the MakerDAO stablecoin system. It's a decentralized stablecoin where people, escrow ETH into something they call a CDP, a collateralized debt position, and mint DAI out into the world. But DAI is redeemable for $1 back to MakerDAO in Ether, and that's the settlement currency that Augur will be using in V2. So rolling forward, people won't be placing bets in units of Ether, and they also won't be settling or making those bets in the denomination of Ether. Everything's going to be in DAI, shown as the equivalent of US dollars, very similar to how everything is shown in a regular sportsbook nowadays.
So as you get towards V2 and the path to liquidity, what are some of the things that are going to be most valuable and critical to your team? Obviously, time is something and just building, but are there other things that you'll look to and hopefully create into the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So coming with V2, we obviously have changes that we hope will increase user adoption, such as DAI as the settlement currency. However, we will Augur V2 will also have things like a protocol level built-in affiliate system. So if you refer somebody to an Augur market and they end up making a trade, your Ethereum address will forever receive a percentage of their trading fees. And there's companies like Guesser and BlitzPredict that are being built on top of Augur, which are essentially for-profit, kind of similar to what a bookie is today. However, they're using Augur underneath to run these markets and run these books. These people are starting to build platforms and come to life, and they are creating markets on Augur and market making on them, and giving very good odds, giving very good lines. More of these are coming later down the line as well. But V2, we hope increased user adoption across the board with different types of kind of marketing schemes that people will just figure out to do with the affiliate system, as well as being able to bet in a stable currency. Markets are going to resolve faster. We have a new UI coming out. We're going to be able to, you're going to have a kind of a betting skin. So you're going to be able to toggle odds in Augur and, have a skin a little bit more geared towards a Betfair style exchange. So just kind of overall, we've taken quite a bit of feedback in the past year now through Reddit, Twitter, email, phone call, everywhere. If you send us some feedback, I promise you we read it. And we've just been focusing, on trying to pick, out of that, what are the most important things, what do users want, and how do we build that into the product, and how do we get that out there, and, that overall kind of increased adoption. And eventually one day, we're going to be able to have these kind of global liquidity pool for individual markets, for sports betting markets or financial markets. It's going to be anybody has the access to go on and create one of these markets for pennies on the dollar, very, very small cost, at least in comparison to what it costs to create a similar product to that in the real world today. And long run, it's we're going to be able to have these pools of markets where anybody can participate. The barrier to entry to do so is really low. The fiat gateways from fiat to cryptocurrency hopefully be solved. There's companies like Youre coming out that are doing purchase a small amount of DAI with a credit card with a Chrome plugin really quickly. So all these problems are kind of be working on and solved. And I do think within a year and a half, Ethereum dApps are going to get to a point where they're nearly as good as web apps, at least in terms of user experience. For things that aren't, for things that are within its control, that are within the control of the application. So you're always going to wait for transaction times on Ethereum, but these applications that you're using on the web are going to get significantly snappier, faster, better. They're going to be doing in-browser syncing, and pretty much every decentralized application is kind of doing a V2 deployment around this time this year, next year. Everyone's kind of on that next iteration. So every protocol is kind of getting an upgrade as well. MakerDAO is getting additional collateral. It's I think it's a good time for decentralized applications, and you're going to see a lot of maturity in some of these web apps and projects and programs that people are working on.
Take us through a little bit, if you don't mind, this whole, for-profit companies building on top of Augur, for example. What would make a young business, a startup business, want to do that as opposed to doing it themselves or having some other centralized component to it? What are the benefits of building on top of Augur?
Absolutely. Well, so if you take Gesser, for example, so an interesting thing about Gesser is that it's non-custodial. So they don't have to accept deposits or hold custody of user funds. Users come to Gesser with MetaMask or whatever wallet they use, and money only leaves their wallet when they are sending it directly to a Augur contract to interact with the market. So as a operator, you're not responsible for users' funds. You're not holding funds on users' behalf. You don't have that liability, as well as you are able to create a market that anybody can access. Unlike, I guess, today, if you were to an offshore, you make an offshore book, an offshore sports book. You're somewhat limited in what you can do. I know some of these books don't, probably properly block access to the countries and locations that they should. But yeah, long run, I mean, that's at that point, they're just kind of doing regulatory arbitrage, and I don't think that's a good business model long run. But it's find the jurisdictions that you can operate in and operate within. But Augur lets you do that, but every jurisdiction that's okay within can trade within each other now. So every jurisdiction, where sports betting can be done with, some license that, they can go set up and purchase or whatnot. And, any place that's, easier than the United States, they can all start sharing the same liquidity pool. Anybody who trades can all start sharing the same book and start sharing the same liquidity pool. That inherently shares users, that inherently shares market creators, market traders, the whole entire ecosystem. And, long run, we think that's a pretty powerful thing.
So you can essentially gather up all the, in quotation marks, legal jurisdictions where the process is allowed, whether it's trading or betting or gambling or whatever you want to call it, and then ultimately that can be one overall liquidity pool.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one overall liquidity pool where it's like, hey, here's the technology for the sports book that, is something that you're all doing. And, you don't have to take custody of users' deposits. You're not liable for resolving markets. You're not, it's in terms of like somebody who's guesser or blitz predict, there's a opportunity to come into this space, I guess I would say, and not have to do a lot of the things that a traditional sports book would have to do, just inherently by nature, because this stuff you can think of Augur as kind of like, a white labeled exchange. You really only need to plug a UI up to it to, work within it and, make bets and whatnot. But, Augur is kind of like a white labeled exchange. So it's, people can come and you can build a entire prediction market exchange where you only need to build the front end. You only need to build the part that interacts with the users. The exchange is built, the market creation is built, the resolution is built, and it's built in a decentralized and trustless and hardened way, very similar to Bitcoin. So it can be underlying infrastructure of all of these markets, if everybody, kind of chose to, operate on all of the same rails in theory, quote unquote. But, from a perspective of a for-profit, you can come and build a sports book now, and your operational overhead is just significantly less because you don't have to deal with like running an exchange. You don't have to deal with user deposits. You don't have to deal with any of this. It's all taken care of for you inherently within the protocol. And, it becomes a more, lightweight and interesting operation to run, I would say.
Yeah. And thinking ahead, if you have, the wisdom of a crowd's effect in these markets and you have efficient markets with high liquidity, you can basically build a search engine for the future where whatever Augur thinks, and it's obviously there's different probabilities that go within the different predictions, but in that like long frame view, you can potentially say, okay, is it going to rain, on my wedding day next year? You can put up a market for it and find out what the actual better chances are than going to some weather app or some weather website that probably doesn't really know the answer.
Absolutely. One of our early little pieces of marketing copy we had was, imagine being able to Google, who is going to win the 2020 president election, and the result is, Augur says so-and-so has a 64% chance of being the 2020 elected, blah, blah, blah. That's what could happen. Yeah. And I mean, we can kind of see that today for the markets that are on Augur. Augur does give, fairly accurate odds, at least that are following the other books. I think what's really going to be interesting is when we start seeing the usage and takeoff of some markets on Augur that are markets that, aren't on some of these other websites and other books, and seeing the impact of those and seeing the forecasting ability of those. I think that's like what is yet to be seen, and like the long-term really cool thing of Augur is like the true long-term forecasting potential of it. And right now it's a toddler, it's a baby, it's like it's walking, it's like it's kind of going back and forth and swaying, and but like it's a baby, it's growing up, it's walking. Long run, this is going to be a very cool thing to see grow up and harden and see how different people end up figuring out how to use this technology.
What about on the individual side? It strikes me as in that world you could have, if you're a very good forecaster, and I reference some of Tetlock's work and what he's done in this space, even with the Good Judgment Project and some of the methodology for finding Superforecasters. You could have basically the best of the best on Augur get some form of an Augur rank where they have a number or letter grade or whatever it is associated with their predictions, and you can find some of the best people in the world who are very, very, very apt at predicting what's going to happen and putting their money where their mouth is, essentially in high liquid, efficient markets.
Absolutely. You can see it. You can see that at like a high level today. So there's, you can see the like Augur profit leaderboard. Everything on Augur is public and transparent. So there's a website, exploreaugur.com, and it has a leaderboard where you can see, profits and losses by all Ethereum addresses that have interacted with the Augur protocol. And so you can see who's like the biggest winners and the biggest losers on Augur. And you can see all their trades as well. All that data is public and available. So it's just a matter of taking this data and information and packaging it into something that's viewable and you can make sense of it, and two, also making sure that's this is a large enough data set to be taking reliable data from. But you can see the all-time winnings of Augur people, and in theory, like, you can go take the top trader right here and follow every single one of his trades if you would want to. And that's, kind of the beauty of this as well, is that, everything is super transparent, and it's much better. It's a much better end deal for a trader. You have significantly more privacy, security, not privacy in terms of people, seeing what you do, because everything is transparent, but privacy in terms of you're not giving, a strange bookie your name and a picture of your passport and your credit card and all this stuff. So it's a much better offering to the bettor, I think, that cares about some of these issues that, you have with the experience of betting with the traditional sports book today.
So in terms of innovation, have you sort of dissected where you think the innovation is going to come from? Because just thinking out loud, it strikes me places that will allow this type of thing, like maybe Malta, Isle of Man, maybe the UK or Australia, or some of these places with established sports betting regulation might be interested in innovating in this area. Or have you looked at what companies are building on top of Augur specifically and how they're going to operate?
Yeah, I don't know exactly too much about. We're aware of Guesser and Blitz Predict building on top of Augur. I'm not entirely sure what their structure is or how they've set that up. Or I believe Guesser is in Spain, and I believe Blitz Predict will be in Ireland as well. But for what it's worth, I'm at the Forecast Foundation, we position ourselves as we just develop and maintain the core Augur code base. So we don't host anything, we don't run anything. We don't run a hosted instance of Augur. We don't have any control over the contracts that are deployed. You either have to download the Augur software itself, or people use IPFS to access it within the browser as well. But at the end of the day, we have no control over this. We have nothing that we can do for this, and that has thus, we haven't had a need to essentially, research or dig too far into different types of licensing and jurisdictions who are, happy and friendly and whatnot. That's we see that more as that's the job of these for-profits. We see ourselves as, our job is to make sure that this core protocol works and is secure, and other people can come in and figure out everything else and build on top of it. But, we want really one job and one job only, which is just to make sure that the core base remains secure.
So what about the US sports betting marketplace and the new world that's emerging there? Have you had any strange meetings or emails or requests that's arisen from that?
No, I just think, generally the narrative is like picking up. People are talking about sports betting more. It's becoming just, I think, a bit more of a popularized thing. People are hearing that their state is discussing, legalizing sports betting, or that, they just heard the state next door open the first, sports book or whatnot. So I think, the whole, United States and sports betting thing is generally it's kind of given like a spark and, a lot of attention, obviously, to this kind of industry and space as a whole. And I imagine it's only going to get more crazy and chaotic and larger as as the next couple of years come down and states actually start accepting some of this stuff and more and more come on board. But in the long run, I think it's probably good for Augur, just because it's exposing, at least right now, more people to the idea and the concept of sports betting, and that this is a thing that exists, and that it's going to become more of a thing in our lives. But no strange emails or anything like that. I would say, other than people looking to. We get lots of emails from like the team at Augur.net gets a lot of emails from people who like think we're like a bookie, and they like email me and they're like, hey, I want to like bet $10,000 on so and so. And I'm just like this is like a generalized support like email for like help technical email for Augur. Like we don't do this. Like this isn't us. But no, I think we've definitely seen a uptick in interest from the like general crowd, more so in the past year and a half, where prior it was much more either if you knew about Augur and liked Augur like prior to a year and a half, 2 years ago, you were probably like really heavy into crypto or really heavy into gambling, one or the other. And like in the past 2 years, our audience has been growing slightly to the level of where there's like some more of like the casual audience in there, which I think is interesting.
So you touched on it briefly before. I wanted to just dig in a little bit further on the affiliate side. Obviously, it's a key part of the gaming industry and the centralized gaming industry. What are your plans, or what do you think they'll look like 12, 24, 36 months from now? Do you think it'll be a key area of acquisition for Augur moving forward, or are you going to rely on some of those other means and methods that you've already spoken about?
Yeah, I mean, I do imagine it will be a large driver of user acquisition in V2, at least inherently from what we can see on how current books work, on how current exchanges work, even outside of sports betting and betting, generally. Social referrals, the friend network, a friend vouching for something means a lot. It's like, all it takes is one of your friends to say, hey, I used this one thing. Hey, it was cool. It worked. It was great. Try it out. It's like, I trust that if I trust the person that's telling me that. So like these networks and these connections are super powerful. And, I think, we've seen the rise of that more over the past couple of years as well. In cryptocurrency, particularly, some of these exchanges have huge affiliate programs. Like BitMEX has a crazy affiliate program, a referral program, and I mean, so does every sports book, as I'm sure you know. They have these crazy affiliate and deals and whatnot, trying to get people here and there. But in terms of Augur, it's a better deal because one, it's a direct protocol level of affiliate link. So if you refer someone, you will forever receive a percentage of those trading fees directly to your address automatically from that person forever. So it's I think hopefully a better proposition than some of these sports books, particularly if you're using the Augur software. The Augur software is decentralized and censorship resistant. Anybody can use it. So I hope that providing this incentive wakes up some of these affiliate marketers and people with networks and some of these connections and whatnot. But we think and hope that it will be a large driver of user acquisition in the following months.
So just finally, one last question. Can you just give us a recap of year one? You mentioned before it's baby steps, but some of the things you might have learned, some of the things you can share, and what you're going to look to carry forward with you into V2 next year.
Yeah, I mean, we learned a laundry list of there's a laundry list of small things, but they were assumptions or things that we thought would happen in terms of user behavior that didn't happen at all. It's one of those things where it's you do something and it's the user has to turn right here. And sure enough, you put it out there and, the first 10 users turn left and do the exact opposite of what you thought. So, we have a laundry list of those kind of little weird quirks that, we have discovered that we are bringing into V2, I think, on a protocol level and UI level that will make the overall experience just a lot smoother and cleaner and quicker overall. And, in the long run, I think we learned one, that the incentive system and the reporting system for resolving these markets is, relatively robust and secure. It's been running for a year and a month, and we haven't had a market that, we would say resolved, quote unquote, incorrectly. They've all come to pretty much the, general consensus, or what they say is, what was the intent of the trader that was trading on this market. And that's kind of the most scary part of Augur, at least the complex part of Augur, because that's the real incentive system. Making sure that reporters have the proper incentive to come in and actually correct these markets and work together and ensure that the Augur Oracle actually reflects reality and is telling the truth and saying the correct things. That works, and I think that's a big relief that we've seen this work at least for a year in the wild. So we've been able to put a lot of focus and energy on making the experience better for the end user. I think seeing this out in the wild for a year for us has given us kind of like the relative confidence to be the incentive system isn't really changing, because that works. Now the parts that we can change is trading. We can change the UI. We can change the way trading works a little bit. We can trade change the settlement currency. It's we can start making these other changes in other departments that isn't this the reporting incentive system, and we can iterate on that faster. We can we can do more things. It's less it puts us in a less vulnerable position. So I think going into V2, I think that puts us in a good place, because we're half Augur's kind of two pieces. It's a trading exchange, and it's a oracle, decentralized market, decentralized oracle. And decentralized oracle, that works, and that's there. Now it's how do we take this trading part and make this the best possible experience, and make this the best answer on the internet for if you want to bet on something. We want Augur to be, at the end of the day, if you want to bet on something, Augur is the best place to do that on the internet.
No, it all sounds very, very interesting, and it's a very cool thought process to have the search engine for the future. So hopefully it all plays out as we hope. I'll be cheering for you. I'm sure many others will be cheering along the way. And I just want to thank you, Tom, for your time coming on and sharing your thoughts in this certainly an emerging space. So thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.